Long before the innocent Maid ever crossed the iron gates of his estate, the man already existed as a warning. His name was spoken softly in nearby villages, often followed by a pause, as if even the air hesitated to carry it further. People did not need to exaggerate his reputation, the truth alone was enough. He was known as a man no woman could endure, not because of violence alone, but because of the unbearable weight of his presence. Life around him seemed to grow colder, heavier, and darker. His estate stood on the edge of society, removed both by distance and intention. Tall stone walls enclosed a house that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Windows were narrow, curtains always drawn, and the gates rarely opened. Those who worked there came and went quickly, never staying long enough to learn the rhythm of the place. Servants whispered that the house reflected its master, silent, severe, and haunted by something unspoken. The man himself was not always cruel in obvious ways. He did not shout without reason, nor did he strike without cause. His cruelty was quieter, sharper. It lived in his indifference, his cutting words, and the way he dismissed people as if they were temporary shadows passing through his life. Women who entered his household believing they could change him left with their pride bruised and their spirits exhausted. Some came confident, others hopeful, but all departed defeated. No one remembered when he had become this way. Older villagers recalled fragments of a different man, one who once laughed, who once trusted, who once loved deeply. But that man had vanished after a series of losses no one fully understood. What remained was a shell hardened by disappointment and betrayal. He had learned that caring invited pain, and endurance was something he no longer expected from anyone. Because of this, society justified its judgment. He is impossible, they said. No woman could live with him. It became a statement repeated so often that it turned into a rule. Women were warned away, mothers cautioned their daughters, and matchmakers avoided his name entirely. He became less a man and more a legend, one defined by failure and fear. Inside the house, the atmosphere mirrored these beliefs. Meals were eaten in silence. Footsteps echoed too loudly in empty corridors. Servants kept their eyes lowered, careful not to provoke his irritation. Every interaction felt like walking across thin ice, knowing that one wrong word could end employment, or worse, confidence. The house did not feel alive, it merely existed, waiting. Yet beneath this cold exterior lay a man who had not chosen loneliness lightly. His endurance had been worn down over years of disappointment. He had built walls not to dominate others, but to protect what little remained of himself. He did not expect understanding, nor did he want it. Expectation had once cost him everything. This is where the story truly begins, not with love or hope, but with certainty. Certainty that no woman could endure him. Certainty that nothing good could grow in such a place. Certainty shared by everyone except the man himself, who believed not that women failed him, but that endurance itself was a lie. And into this world of fixed beliefs, silence, and fear, fate prepared to send someone no one saw coming. She arrived without ceremony, on a quiet morning when the sky hung low and gray, as though even the weather felt uncertain about the place she was entering. There were no hopeful glances back, no dramatic pause at the gates, only a young woman stepping forward with a small bundle in her hands and necessity in her heart. Unlike the others who had come before her, she did not arrive believing she could change the men who ruled the estate. She arrived because she had nowhere else to go. Her background was unremarkable. She was not educated in the ways of the world, nor hardened by it. Orphaned young and passed between relatives who could barely afford their own lives, she had learned early how to make herself useful without becoming invisible. Kindness, for her, was not a strategy, it was a habit. She worked quietly, listened more than she spoke, and carried herself with a softness that some mistook for weakness. The servants noticed her immediately, not because she stood out, but because she didn't. She did not ask questions about the master. She did not lean in to hear the whispered warnings. When they tried to caution her, voices low, eyes darting toward the corridors, she only nodded politely. Fear, it seemed, had not yet learned her name. Another one, someone muttered. She won't last a week. The house itself felt different to her, though she could not explain why. Where others felt dread, she felt weight, like a sadness soaked into the walls. The silence did not frighten her, it reminded her of nights spent alone, when survival depended on patience rather than courage. She moved through the halls carefully, not because she was afraid, but because she respected the space, as one might respect a wound not yet healed. Her first days passed without incident. She rose early, completed her tasks with precision, and kept her head lowered as expected. Yet there was something quietly disruptive about her presence. She did not rush when spoken to sharply, nor did she flinch at cold remarks. She accepted instructions without resentment and corrections without tears. This unsettled the household more than defiance ever could. The other servants watched her closely. Some pitied her, certain she would soon be broken. Others resented her calm, interpreting it as ignorance. None believed she understood what awaited her. After all, innocence rarely survived long in this house. And yet, there was intention beneath her gentleness. She noticed things: how the master avoided certain rooms, how his tone sharpened when spoken to too directly, how his silence deepened at dusk. She did not interpret these as reasons to fear him, but as signs of a man carrying something too heavy to name. When she finally learned his reputation in full, it did not change her course. She did not romanticize him, nor did she prepare herself for battle. She simply resolved to do her work well and remain kind, even if that kindness was never returned. Endurance, to her, was not about withstanding cruelty, it was about staying true to oneself in difficult places. The house had seen many women arrive with confidence, charm, or ambition. None had come like this, without expectation, without pretense, without the belief that she must either conquer or flee. She arrived as she was, unarmored and honest. And though no one recognized it yet, this quiet entrance marked the first crack in a story everyone believed was already finished. Their first true encounter did not happen with raised voices or dramatic confrontation. It happened in silence. He noticed her before she noticed him, standing too still at the edge of the corridor, eyes lowered, hands folded as though she were part of the furniture. Something about her presence irritated him immediately. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she existed too calmly in a house built on tension. When he spoke, his voice was sharp and deliberate, crafted over years to unsettle. He questioned her work, her pace, her purpose for being there. He expected the familiar reactions: nervous apologies, defensive explanations, or silent resentment. Instead, she answered plainly. She did not rush her words, nor did she tremble. Her tone carried no challenge, only honesty. This unsettled him. He pressed harder. He criticized small details, corrected tasks already done correctly, and tested her patience with deliberate coldness. It was not cruelty for its own sake, it was examination. He had learned that people revealed themselves under pressure, and he wanted to see how long it would take before she broke. But she didn't. She listened. She corrected what needed correcting. When she was wrong, she admitted it without shame. When she was right, she did not argue. Her composure was not submission, it was steadiness. And the more he pushed, the more clearly that steadiness stood apart from fear. To her, he was not the legend whispered about in the servants' quarters. He was a man speaking harshly because something inside him demanded distance. She did not excuse his behavior, but she did not personalize it either. This, perhaps more than anything else, confused him. He was used to being resisted or feared, never simply endured. Their worlds could not have been more different. He had built himself from disappointment, believing strength came from emotional distance. She had survived by remaining open, believing endurance came from consistency rather than control. Every exchange between them was a collision of these beliefs. At times, he would pause mid-sentence, irritated by her lack of reaction. At other times, he dismissed her abruptly, expecting anger or tears that never came. She simply nodded and returned to her duties. This refusal to engage on his terms felt like defiance, even though it wasn't intended as such. The household noticed the tension. Conversations stopped when he entered a room she was in. Servants exchanged glances, waiting for the inevitable explosion that never quite arrived. Instead, there was a quiet standoff, his sharp edges against her softness, neither yielding, neither retreating. Internally, he began to feel something unfamiliar. Not attraction, not sympathy, but disruption. His carefully maintained emotional order no longer worked around her. His indifference failed to unsettle her. His anger found no echo. For the first time in years, his behavior did not produce the outcome he expected. For her part, the strain was real. His words sometimes stung. His presence weighed heavily. But each evening, she chose to remain, not out of stubbornness, but because she believed leaving without reason would allow fear to decide her life. She had endured worse than harsh words. What she had never endured was giving up on her own quiet values. Thus, without either of them realizing it, something shifted. The clash did not end in victory or defeat. It ended in stalemate. And in that unresolved tension, between a man accustomed to breaking others and a woman who would not break, the foundation for everything that followed was laid. Time did what confrontation could not. As days stretched into weeks, the sharp edges of their encounters began to dull, not because he softened, but because routine created moments he could not fully control. The maid's presence became a constant, like the quiet ticking of a clock one eventually notices not by sound, but by absence. He found himself aware when she was not nearby, and unsettled when she was. The first crack appeared in an ordinary moment. He returned late one evening, worn down by thoughts he refused to name, and found a lamp left burning in the corridor. It was a small thing, yet it stirred irritation. He called her sharply, expecting apology or excuse. Instead, she explained simply that the hallway grew dark after sunset, and the servants often stumbled. Her concern was not for rules, but for people. He said nothing, extinguished the lamp himself, and walked away, but something lingered. She began to notice patterns others had learned to ignore. He avoided certain rooms, especially one at the far end of the house that remained locked and untouched. His temper worsened on specific dates, though no one spoke of them. At meals, he barely ate, as if nourishment were a task rather than a need. These were not signs of a monster, she realized, but of a man at war with memory. One afternoon, she overheard him arguing with a visiting associate, his voice tight, words sharp with resentment. When the door slammed and silence returned, she saw him standing alone, shoulders rigid, hands clenched as though holding himself together by force alone. She should have turned away. Instead, she quietly placed a glass of water nearby and left without a word. He stared at it for a long time. No one had ever offered him anything without instruction or obligation. Kindness in his world always came with expectation. This did not. That unsettled him far more than anger ever had. The cracks widened slowly. He caught her humming while she worked, a sound so gentle it felt out of place in the house. He reprimanded her once, claiming the noise distracted him. She apologized and stopped, but the silence afterward felt heavier than before. He found himself missing the sound he had just silenced. Memories began to surface uninvited. A time when the house had echoed with laughter. A voice that once spoke his name without fear. A life before endurance became something demanded rather than shared. He resented these memories, yet her presence seemed to draw them out like splinters long buried. For her part, she never mistook these moments for transformation. She did not believe she was healing him. She simply treated each small opening with care, as one treats a fragile thing, without pressing, without praise. She knew that wounds exposed too quickly often closed just as fast. There were setbacks. Days when his words cut deeper than before. Moments when his silence returned like a wall. Each time, she reminded herself that endurance was not about progress, it was about remaining steady when progress disappeared. Gradually, something changed within him. He began to observe rather than react. To listen rather than dismiss. Not always, not consistently, but enough to frighten him. Because if he acknowledged the pain beneath his armor, he would have to admit how much it had cost him to build it. And yet, the armor was cracking. Not from force. Not from argument. But from the quiet persistence of someone who saw the men beneath it, and chose not to turn away. The breaking point did not arrive suddenly. It built itself quietly, layered over weeks of restraint, misunderstandings, and unspoken truths. For a man who had spent years holding himself together through control, it was never going to be a gentle moment. It came like a fracture finally giving way under weight long ignored. It began with something small, an error that was barely an error at all. A document misplaced, a task completed out of sequence. On any other day, it might have passed with a sharp remark and silence. But on this day, something in him was already unraveling. A memory had been stirred earlier, a name spoken carelessly by a visitor, reopening a wound he had spent years sealing shut. His reaction was swift and brutal, not in action, but in words. He accused her of incompetence, of overstepping, of thinking herself indispensable. His voice echoed through the room, each sentence sharper than the last, fueled by pain he could not admit to feeling. The household froze. Servants lowered their heads, bracing for the familiar ending, tears, apologies, departure. She stood still. At first, she said nothing. She absorbed the words, felt their sting, and allowed the silence to stretch. That silence unnerved him more than resistance ever had. He expected her to flee, to defend herself, or to crumble. Instead, she lifted her eyes and met his gaze, calm, steady, and unmistakably hurt. "I will leave," she said quietly, "if you truly want me to. But not because you are angry. And not because you are afraid." The word struck him harder than any accusation. Afraid. His temper flared again, but this time it faltered. He told her she knew nothing of him, nothing of what he had endured. That endurance was a myth people clung to when they were too weak to face reality. He told her she would be like the others, gone by morning. That was when she spoke again, and this time, her voice carried weight. "I stay because I choose to," she said. "Not because I don't feel the pain of your words. I feel them. But I also see what you hide behind them. If you want me gone, I will go. But don't pretend it proves anything except that you cannot bear to be seen." The room went silent. He had driven people away his entire life, convinced it was proof of his strength. Now, for the first time, someone stood before him offering him the truth without cruelty, without demand. And he did not know how to respond. She did not wait for an answer. She bowed her head slightly, not in submission but in respect, and left the room. Her footsteps faded down the corridor, each one sounding like a countdown. That night, he did not sleep. He replayed her words over and over, trying to dismantle them, to find the flaw. But there was none. What terrified him most was not the possibility of her leaving, it was the realization that he did not want her to. By morning, he understood what the breaking point truly was. It was not her refusal to be driven away. It was the collapse of the lie he had built his life upon, that endurance was weakness, and solitude was safety. For the first time, the men who believed no woman could endure him faced a harder truth: perhaps endurance had never failed him. Perhaps he had never allowed it to exist at all. Morning arrived quietly, as if the house itself feared disturbing what had shifted during the night. The men rose with the weight of unfamiliar thoughts pressing heavily on him. For years, he had defined endurance as something demanded from others, something they failed to provide, justifying his bitterness. Now, that definition no longer held. The maid's words had unsettled it beyond repair. When he saw her again, it was in the ordinary rhythm of the household. She moved through her duties with the same calm precision as always, neither avoiding him nor seeking him out. There was no expectation in her eyes, no lingering challenge from the night before. She had spoken her truth and left the rest to him. This restraint, this refusal to demand a response, was what finally broke through his defenses. He spoke to her differently that day. Not gently, not warmly, but honestly. His words were fewer, his tone stripped of its usual edge. When she finished a task, he did not correct it unnecessarily. When he issued an instruction, it was clear and direct, without provocation. These changes were subtle, easily overlooked, yet to him they felt monumental. For the first time, endurance shifted direction. He began to endure his own emotions instead of fleeing from them. The anger that once shielded him now exposed him. The silence that once protected him now felt hollow. In its place grew something fragile: accountability. He started to recognize moments when his cruelty had been reflex, not reason. Recognizing this did not absolve him, it exhausted him. She noticed the change but did not celebrate it. She understood instinctively that transformation, if named too soon, often retreated. Instead, she responded with the same steadiness that had carried her this far. Kindness without reward. Presence without pressure. In small ways, he allowed himself to change. He reopened a room long locked and stood in it briefly, memories flooding in. He ate more at meals, as though remembering that the body, too, required care. He listened when servants spoke, sometimes even asking questions. Each act felt like walking without armor, terrifying and strangely relieving. One evening, he admitted something aloud for the first time in years. Not a confession, not an apology, just a truth. "I do not know how to be different," he said. The words felt heavy, imperfect, but real. She did not offer instructions. She did not promise to guide him. She simply replied, "Then we will learn separately, but not alone." Endurance, he realized then, was not about remaining in pain until it became numb. It was about staying present while things were uncertain. It was about choosing to remain open when retreat felt safer. What she had shown him was not submission, but courage of a quieter kind. For her, endurance was never about him alone. It was about honoring herself, her values, her compassion, her belief that people were more than their worst moments. She stayed not to save him, but because leaving out of fear would have betrayed who she was. By redefining endurance, they reshaped the space between them. Not as master and servant defined by power, but as two people learning how to exist without fear dictating every choice. The house, once heavy with silence, began to breathe again. And in that fragile, imperfect space, something neither of them had planned for began to grow, not triumph, not romance, but the possibility of becoming whole. Change did not announce itself with celebration. It revealed itself quietly, in moments so ordinary they might have been missed by anyone not paying attention. The house no longer felt like a place people endured, it felt like a place people inhabited. Doors opened more often. Light lingered longer in the halls. Conversations, once hushed, began to carry tone again. The man was no longer feared in the way he once had been. His presence still commanded respect, but it no longer crushed those around him. He spoke with restraint, listened with intention, and when anger surfaced, as it sometimes did, he no longer let it define him. The transformation was not perfection. It was honesty. And that honesty reshaped everything. The servants noticed first. They spoke her name with something new in their voices, not pity, not disbelief, but quiet admiration. She had not confronted him publicly, nor claimed victory. She had simply remained. And in remaining, she had shifted the impossible. When word spread beyond the estate, it was met with disbelief. People remembered the man as he had been and struggled to reconcile that memory with what they now heard. She must have changed him, they said. But those closest to the truth understood something deeper. She had not changed him by force. She had given him space to change himself. He acknowledged this one evening, standing beside her in the fading light. They were wrong about endurance, he said. Not accusatory. Reflective. And so was I. She did not smile in triumph. She did not accept praise. Instead, she responded simply, they were wrong about what endurance looks like. The title of Maid Northwest longer defined her place in the house. She remained humble, but she was no longer invisible. Her voice mattered. Her presence was acknowledged. Not because she demanded it, but because it had been earned through consistency and courage. The man, once convinced that no woman could endure him, now understood the deeper truth: endurance was never about tolerating cruelty. It was about choosing humanity when bitterness offered an easier path. What she had endured was not him, but the fear, the silence, and the weight of expectation surrounding him. Their bond did not rely on dramatic declarations. It existed in shared space, mutual respect, and the understanding that healing was ongoing. Some days were easier than others. Some wounds still ached. But neither retreated at the first sign of discomfort. They had learned that endurance was not about staying at all costs, it was about staying with honesty. The estate, once known as a place of failure, gained a new reputation. It became a quiet testament to the idea that people are not fixed, and neither are the stories told about them. Visitors felt it immediately, the absence of fear, the presence of balance. In the end, the innocent maid proved them wrong, not by becoming extraordinary in the way the world expected, but by remaining exactly who she was. Gentle, steady, and unafraid to stay when leaving would have been easier. And the man, once defined by his inability to be endured, discovered something he had long believed impossible: that redemption does not roar. It arrives softly, carried by someone brave enough to stand still in its path. That was her strength. That was her legacy.